Hey guys, this is the notes for solving radical equations. This is part one. The next video is going to be part two. Before we get started, I want to look at some example problems that I would have had like on a bell ringer or a warm up for us as we get started to solve these radical equations. The first one here says solve for x, and it's x squared plus 4 equals 20. This one y'all are pretty familiar with. You of course want to isolate x, so I would start by subtracting 4 from both sides. I would have x squared equals 16. And again, this is just an example problem I just pulled up from some old resources. To get rid of the squared, y'all usually know this. To undo a squared, you use a square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That'll cancel out the squared and just give us an x. And then just as a recap, as a reminder, if you take the square root of a number, if you take the square root like we did here, then you are going to have plus and minus. The square root of 16 is 4. There is a positive 4 and a negative 4 that would work in this situation. Let me just prove to you the negative 4. If I use parentheses, negative 4 squared plus 4. When I square negative 4, I get 16 plus 4 equals 20. So positive and negative works there. So just as a reminder, if you take the square root in your solving process, you do have positive and negative 4. Let's switch gears and start thinking about our radical equations. So I have kind of a baby example here. The square root of x plus 1 equals 4. You're going to do the same thing, isolating the x or isolating your square root. We'll subtract 1 from both sides. And we have square root of x equals 3. So just as a lead into our lesson, how would you get rid of a square root? Well, just like we did in the last example, the inverse or opposite of taking a square root is squaring something. So if I square both sides of my equation, that'll cancel out the square root, and we just have x equals 3 squared is 9. I'll check it and show you square root of 9 plus 1. Square root of 9 is 3 plus 1 is 4. So this is the process we're going to be doing. We're going to be solving equations with radicals. So this number 8 here was just like a little baby example, but we're going to follow the same process this week solving our equations. So here's the notes, solving radical equations, part 1. Again, these problems are going to be very simple. Part 2 is a little more involved. So your steps. First, you're going to isolate your radical, just like I did on number 8. Before I really dove into the problem, I got the radical by itself. Step 2, I'll square both sides, just like I did on that other problem. Number 3, we'll solve for x. So everything pretty simple. Number 4 is very important. We need to check our solutions because look at the directions. The directions say solve the equation and check for extraneous solutions. These are the same extraneous solutions we've had in the prior week's lessons. These are answers I got solving. I got them correctly. But when I take them and I plug them back into the original problem, they don't work. And that just has to do with squaring values and things like that. All right, so we will definitely be checking all of our answers when we finish our problems just to make sure that they do, in fact, work. So let's start with number 1. Your first step, isolate that radical. So I will need to subtract 1 before I really get started. The square root of 5x minus 36. And be careful as you're writing these. So the minus 36 is in the radical. The plus 1 was not. As you write these, just take some extra care so you don't confuse yourself as you walk through your steps. Okay, so the radical is completely alone. It does have 2 terms inside of it, but no big deal. So now that the radical is isolated, I square both sides to get rid of that radical. Those will cancel and give us just 5x minus 36 out of the radical, and 3 squared is 9. You can see you're almost home free. We have made it to a 2-step equation. Add 36 to both sides. 5x equals 45. Divide both sides by 5, and x equals 9. Okay, so we did a great job solving. Number 4, we are going to check our solutions. So let me plug in 9 into our original problem. The square root of 5 times 9, make sure I make my square root big enough, minus 36, plus 1. Does that Let's see. 5 times 9, 45 minus 36. 45 minus 36 is going to give us 9. Square root of 9 is 3 plus 1 does in fact equal 4. Check. So this answer is good. Done. So one answer, your x equals 9. We plugged it in, it worked. Answer is 9. Moving on. Number 2. Isolate your radical first. So add 13 to both sides so the radical is completely alone. Negative 12 plus 13 is 1. Once your radical is isolated, you are going to square both sides to undo that radical. That gets x minus 6 completely alone, and 1 squared is 1. One-step equation, add 6 to both sides. X equals 7. Looks like a good final answer. We want to check. We want to create a really good habit. Hint, hint, wink, wink, cough, cough for our next lesson. We want to make sure we create a really good habit of checking our answers. So I'm going to plug 7 in for x into the original problem. 7 minus 6 minus 13. Does it equal negative 12? Question mark. 7 minus 6 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1. Minus 13 is negative 12, so it checks out. Okay. Want to create really good habits checking our answers. 7 is our answer. How you doing so far? We got 1 left, and we will be done. Let's see. Number 3, isolate your radical. Add 13 to both sides. The square root of 3x minus 5 equals negative 11 plus 13 is 2. We are going to square both sides to get rid of that radical. The squared will get the radical. We'll get rid of the radical, and we'll have 3x minus 5 equals 2 squared is 4. You're in a 2-step equation. Add 5 to both sides. 3x equals 9. Divide both sides by 3. X equals 3. Looks like a great answer. Let's check it. Creating good habits for our next lesson. Put it where I can see the original problem. Plugging in 3 times 3 minus 5. Inside the radical, minus 13 equals negative 11. 3 times 3 is 9 minus 5. We're checking to see if it equals. 9 minus 5 equals 4. The square root of 4 is 2. Minus 13 would give us a negative 11. So that checks out. 3 is my final answer. So that is your first lesson of solving radical equations. You isolate the radical first. You square both sides to get rid of the radical. Remember, what you do to one side of an equation, you have to do the other. So that's why we squared the other side. And that should get rid of your radical where you have an equation nice and pretty that you can solve, either a 2-step or a 1-step. And then always check your answers. Always check your answers, because there might be, wink, wink, some answers in the future that don't work when we plug them in. So make a good habit of plugging in those answers.